What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Sheehan Show here with me, Sean Sheehan, on Sherdog.com. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by my good old pal, Mike Pendleton, back again for another year to talk a little bit about PFL. We did how many shows? We do 3 or 4 shows last year. This is the first, I'm sure, of many this year as well to talk about the PFL. Mike, how have you been? I know you've been doing a lot of stuff on the PFL with Sherdog, with Jonathan Coachman and all like that. It's been a busy start to the year.
It has been a busy start to the year. You know, PFL changed their format. I'm happy you didn't change your mind about having me on this year. So let's have the PFL change stuff. Let's not have you change stuff. I love talking to you, man. And it's been a great start for the PFL. Honestly, I know MMA fans are so just fixated on if it's not the UFC, it's terrible. Or, you know, some people in the media, if they don't get the access, they're like, they're terrible, right? But when you look at a company who is looking to rebrand and rebuild, I think the PFL is knocking it out of the park this year compared to previous years.
Yeah. And the events, and we'll get into the events. We talk about some of the fighters, talk about some of the events. Dave, I've come on here, so I'm recording at like 5 o'clock in the morning after all of these events. And I'm like, I should be in a really bad mood right now, and I should be giving out right now. But the events have all been so good that it's hard to really knock them in any way. And like the PFL to me, and I don't know if you agree, Mike, or not, but like they're very easy to knock. Like everyone has a bad word to say about the PFL, and I think like this podcast here and most podcasts that I record and you record, like we're talking about the actual fights, we're talking about the actual events, we're talking about the actual format. And I actually don't think there's much to give out about in all of that part of it. You can talk about maybe the business side, are they making the right moves, are they signing the right people? And I agree, there are definitely big issues there. I think the Bellator purchase went probably as badly as it could, unfortunately, which is terrible for mixed martial arts in general. But again, let's see in 6 months or 12 months time how that has worked out. But in general, the sport I think is really good. You mentioned the format there. I want to talk about that first. And here's my opinion on the format, Mike. I actually liked the format last year, and I know most people didn't. And when I heard the format was changing, I was like, well, is this a decision that's just kind of like because a lot of people are giving out, and a lot of those people giving out, are they really even watching, or just the people kind of give it out from the sidelines? So I was a bit skeptical about it, because I think there were some dead rubbers and some didn't work, and then we had some rematches that made no sense that the PFL couldn't do anything about. I think the Musayev one last year, that, you know, it was a big issue. So I would real skepticism about it. And if people listen to these shows already know, I still would have. I still like the old system, but I love the new system as well. I actually think it makes... The one big issue is I don't think it's amazing for the fighters if they only get one fight a year, but seeing some of the lineups coming out, the fighters are getting more fights. I see, you know, even Nathan Kelly, who got knocked out from Ireland, he's talking about, I have a fight booked in 7 weeks time or something. So my one reservation on it is probably gone. I think the format, the straight knockout, has worked well. I think the fighters are fighting more for the kill, if you want to put it that way, and we've had great cards because of it. And my reservations are almost gone. I think this new format is really good, and I really like the straight knockout. Tell me, Mike, did you like it last year? Were you one of the people that thought it needed an adjustment? And what's your thoughts on the new format?
Well, going back to last year, and I do want to talk the Bellator purchase later, but going back to last year, I loved the format. You know, when I was in Salt Lake City, there was that viral moment of Michael Dufort, advancing to the playoffs, screaming in the Bud Light Lounge while we're in the press room trying to interview Rob Wilkinson. His press conference is interrupted by Michael Dufort. For those moments that you can only get in combat sports and maybe in college basketball March Madness tournament, when your team makes it on a miracle, right? Those moments are special. But it's even more special when a fighter has no outside circumstances and they pave the way for themselves. And so I did like last year because there was special moments that the season and the points created. But then there was also controversy. And so when you look at it, especially in MMA, how do you, as a company, kind of take your hands off things and go, we're going to leave it up to everybody else. We're going to leave it up to the fighters. Well, I know. Lose and go home. You said it perfectly, Sean. These fighters are getting up. They're going for the kill. When you have to watch the clock in MMA as a fighter,
Yes.
most of the time you're tired. And that's what we were seeing last year. You're taking off your game because you need a first round finish or a second round knockout. We were seeing fighters not fighting at their best. And you look at this year's tournament, 21 finishes in the first 32 tournament fights. I think that tells the story right there. And this probably won't be the only time I mention him, but I'm going to give props to my guy, Jonathan Coachman, who said after one of the first round events, one thing I love, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, one thing I love, they have him as the voice, kind of the face meeting the media moving forward after every event. Someone asked him, what do you do with fighters who lose in the first round? And he said, that's a great question. Fighters who lose in the first round should know that their tournament is over, but their year is definitely not over. And I think that was kind of a hesitation for fans, for media, for fighters. It's like, oh, so if I lose, like I'm done. No, you're done with the tournament. But Sean, you've been around this game long enough. I've been around this game long enough to know injuries happen, pullouts happen, life happens. You may get a chance to get back into the tournament. You may be a new signee that the company just announced, filling in for an injury replacement in the semifinals. One win, you're in to the championship fight. Or you may just have an opportunity to keep your year going. The international leagues are popping up all over the place. There's going to be fights to be made. So long story short, I did like the format last year with the regular season and the points. But I think this year, going to a tournament format, single elimination, the PFL has said, we're not getting involved with anything. We'll just let the fighters do the work for us.
And you're right, too, about the fighters getting signed. Obviously, you're alluding to Kevin Lee there. But even when my countryman Ken Lochran got signed a couple of weeks ago, and he said, there was rumours of him having a fight with Lewis McGrillen, and then he said, I'm going to be in the tournament next year. I kind of thought to myself, well, you're one injury away from being in the tournament this year. So, don't get too ahead of yourself. And I think those spots are always open. Plus, we both kind of alluded to there, the openings for the fighters to have another fight this year before they go back into the tournament next year, I think is really, really good. The other thing I wanted to ask you before we get into some of the fights, I've had my biggest issue with PFL this year, and most of my stuff is positive with PFL. The adjustment we talked about the adjustment in the format of the fights. The adjustment in the format of the PFL, where the tournament is no longer all your best fighters, right? So obviously Musayev and Kurmagomedov are not in it this year. Maybe they're going to be fighting. Maybe one of them will fight the winner of the tournament, whatever way it works out. And there's a couple of, obviously we had Patchy Mix at the start. He's gone to the UFC now, but a few more as well. I'll be honest, I thought that was a major departure from PFL from what they were. They talk about being the Champions League of MMA, and every fight is a tournament fight, and every fight is earned, and it's meritocracy. So that kind of changes things with that. But again, that was a major thing that people complained about, and they've taken the decision to change that. And although I think they should have stuck with the tournament being the be all and end all, I do get what they're trying to do, because the tournament, let's be honest, it wasn't working from the way it was. This year, the fights have been so much better. The events have been so much better. You can't really complain about it. And they needed to change something. We've all, looked at people and just do the same thing over and over and over again until oblivion, or, watch a soccer match and no one makes a sub and it's like, bring someone on, change something, do something. We're just watching failure here. And the PFL, they've changed something. Whether it work, whether it won't work, I suppose we'll see. But what we could have at the end of that is a champion from this year taking on one of the best fighters in the PFL in such a massive fight. My issue is what goes on after that. Who do they fight? Let's say if that fight happens in December, what happens in February, March? What happens with the next tournament? Like, how does that work? Does the champion only fight once a year? Like, I think that's all kind of up in the air at the moment, and maybe we'll get some clarification on that as it goes. But what did you think of that change, Mike, from it being the be all and end all in the tournament to now that no longer being the case? The tournament is almost, for some divisions, obviously it is, but for others, it's to set up the next contender for who currently is the champion.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of layers there. And this kind of brings me back to the purchase of the Bellator roster, right? A lot of people were probably super critical of PFL losing a name like Patricio Pitbull, even more so Patchy Mix. But one thing you have to understand, if you've ever been married, once you're not happy, you're no longer happy. So while people are looking at it and saying, wow, they're losing talent, I would argue, and there's no briefcase underneath my desk, Sean, that says I have to defend every move,
Yes.
financially, right, for the PFL. But it just, if you want to play devil's advocate and support the PFL, I would argue that they're listening whether people like it or not. You guys are holding Patchy Mix hostage. Just let him go. And then they let him go, and the internet's like, I can't believe you let him go. Well, you wanted him in the UFC. That's where he is. So they listened. Because if you know, and not everyone knows, but if you pull the curtain back, there are reports and rumors that said right before the Bellator purchase, Bellator raised a bunch of contracts and then sold. No one can handle that type of business. So I look at the PFL. They tried this transition last year, and then in a way they struck gold. Dakota Ditcheva. She didn't fight for Bellator, and she was their top star. So now, and I don't know, but the powers that be probably got in a room and go, what if we let these bigger name fighters explore different opportunities? Let them go to the UFC. Let's build around the world. Let's build from our roster. Let's find our own stars, because eventually, just like people were gunning for Kayla Harrison, instead of having the conversation of when is Dakota Ditcheva going to leave the PFL, I think they're on a trajectory of when is someone going to join the PFL to beat Dakota Ditcheva? When is someone going to join the PFL to beat Paul Hughes when he potentially becomes world champion, which I think he should already be? You know, all these names are now making the decision, not just financially, but to take an opportunity for themselves. Because when you join the UFC, you are truly that small fish in a big pond. So when I look at what the PFL is doing, it's going to take some time to understand and learn from a world global perspective, right? We heard that last year, Sean. Global season. I want to be on the global roster. I look at Lewis McGrillen, someone I got to talk to this year, won PFL Europe. Your first thought is, man, why didn't you go to the global stage? Well, then he pulls back the curtain. Contracts are a little different. So if I'm a young Lewis McGrillen, do I want to make less money trying to compete on the world stage? Or do I want to become a superstar for PFL Europe? Maybe win it again, maybe get paid more, maybe be featured on showcase bouts, which is what they're doing with him this year, and get paid more to do that and keep building my brand? Because if I'm a young fighter and I'm not ready for the upper echelon, and I'm not saying Lewis McGrillen isn't, but if you feel like, man, I could just continue to grow and make great money in one part of the world, why wouldn't you do that? So I think the system needs to be explained for people to understand. You have your international leagues, and I think this is going to be the hardest part for everyone to realize. You have your international leagues. You're going to have champions that come through PFL Europe, PFL MENA, PFL Africa this year, and next year PFL Pacific. Those champions will have an opportunity, if good enough, and if agreed to, contract-wise, to be on the PFL Global World Tournament moving forward. Or they can go to Lewis McGrillen route, and they can stay in their respective regions and continue to thrive there. Now, when you look at the tournament champions, yeah, that is the biggest concern. What do we do with the Dakota Ditcheva? What do we do with some of the, why is Godzi back in the world tournament? He just won the PFL season last year, right? Some of these fighters want the challenge of continuing to do it over and over again, but you're going to have the world tournament. You're going to have champion series events later on. At least this is what we've been told. So we're going to see these featured champions, or we're going to see these champions from last year featured on these cards. But then we're also going to have the international leagues like we're seeing in Cape Town, South Africa.
Yeah, I see. That's good, but I think that's very confusing to people. And also, like, if you're calling it the Champions League of MMA as well, and then people win PFL Europe or PFL MENA, and then they're actually not in the global, that's not the Champions League. I actually think it'd be cool if they did a Champions League format where, like, let's say they have the four you mentioned next year, 4 bantamweight winners, put all 4 of them in together, you have a semi-final, you have a fight. Imagine how amazing that'd be. And you could literally call that the Champions League and then have the global tournament. But again, we're getting away from ourselves here. That might be a longer conversation for another day.
I think we're headed that way, though.
Yeah,
I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah.
You know, again, they had to figure it out last year. They're starting it this year. I think the map, the roadmap, the blueprint is starting to get laid out. Smart people like yourself, not me, but smart people like yourself are realizing, hey, it's not going to happen this year. It's probably not happening in 2026, but in 27, 28, we might see fighters from all over the world competing.
Yeah, I would say what I think the PFL need to do in the next, by the time the 1st of January comes, we need to know, not map out the whole year, but we need to know exactly where everyone is, what everyone is doing, because I think that's their biggest issue at the moment. The product is good, the fighters are good, the commentary is good, everything is like, and like all of that stuff wasn't always the case. They have improved on everything. The only thing at the moment that is the issue is the confusion. People are confused. People, who's fighting where, when, and what. That's what they need to get better at. But let's talk about some of the stuff that's already gone on this year. Let's start at the first event, and let's talk about the welterweights and the featherweights. First of all, this welterweight division has been... I mentioned at the start, the 2 guys out of the welterweight division, the 2 best welterweights in the PFL. You could argue 2 of the top 10 best welterweights in the world, which I would. But what we've had here has been a really tremendous few fights so far. We've had the 4 people coming through, obviously, Kikuri, Storley, Tad Jean, and Jason Jackson. I would say maybe differing levels of hype around all of those, but at the same time, the level of hype around that division should be pretty big. I know you're a big Tad Jean fan. We talked about him last year. We'll be talking about Tad Jean, I think, for many years to come in this sport. He's fighting Jason Jackson coming up, I believe, in the first event, isn't it? In a few weeks' time. Talk to us about that welterweight division, first of all, and this fight between Tad Jean and Jason Jackson. I know the other fight between Sterling and Kikuri, good fight as well. Kikuri, Kikuri had a great win over Giannis Bashar, the former cage warrior champion, and Sterling kind of maybe not the best performance in the world, but he did what he did. I think there's one fun side of this draw, and whatever happens, I think it's going to be very fun. But how impressed are you with what has happened so far? And nominally, Tad Jean, how good is this guy?
So when we talked about that whole rant I just went on and understanding where things need to go, right? Like you said, if we only knew where people were going and the events were happening throughout the year from January 1st, it would give us a better idea. The beauty of the PFL World Tournament is if you got everyone in that business all in a room and you laid out the best possible fights this year on January 1st, no one would have said, and I will bet this, Thad Jean and Jason Jackson. But their first round performances made them must-see TV. Jason Jackson's been must-see TV, but Thad Jean stole the spotlight on the same night. Then we have a little face-to-face, little shoving, little jawing. There is not a bigger fight, and you can quote me on this, there is not a bigger fight, especially in the tournament, that the PFL can put on this year that will have as much heat and as much attention as Thad Jean and Jason Jackson. Even if you think you're a PFL hater, you're going to tune in because there's a former Bellator world champion and one of the top rising prospects in any promotion in Thad Jean. But they both had to get it done in the first round. So otherwise, we don't have this fight. I think the welterweight tournament comes down to whoever wins this main event in Nashville. I think not only the tournament champion, but the future of 170 inside the PFL. Because Jason Jackson has a case to make for how he lost his belt at Bellator Champion Series last year, right? He told me that it was taken from me. It was stolen from me. That's a man who's out for revenge. And then you have a young budding superstar in Thad Jean who's like, I really don't care. I don't care about your journey. I care about my journey. And I think for the PFL, not that they have one favorite over the other, but when you hear Thad Jean talk, he says, I want to be the face of the PFL over the next 5 years. You have a guy who's putting the promotion on his back, going up against someone with the pedigree of Jason Jackson. That's who this tournament should be focused on. That's why this is an incredible semifinal matchup. And I think they couldn't have asked for a better matchup. And really, these are the two guys to talk about in this tournament.
100%. I think the featherweights thing that happened on the first night as well. Obviously, the winners that came out of that were Pineda, Habalayev, Braga, and Kim. All but Kim, obviously, all past PFL fighters, and I think Kim was probably, he beat Nathan Gelling, the great win there. My countryman, it was a very, very good win, but I think of the four, he'd probably be the biggest underdog on that. Mavli, obviously a very close fight with Jeremy Kennedy there as well. But, one of those as well, you throw all of them in a hat, who's going to be the one pulled out? I suppose we'll find out. The Bantamweights, Mike, we spoke a lot about Bantamweights over the last couple of years. Why aren't they in the tournament? They got Patchy Mix. Patchy Mix isn't in the tournament. And then they brought him in this year. They've, there was a lot of shocks in this. Like, Higo losing to Alves was a shock. Newsy getting beat by Gutierrez was a shock. Obviously, the missed weight from Kasimov to lose to Justin Vessel came in a short notice after Kieran Clark was unable to fight in that fight. And even Jake Hadley, I think, was the favourite, all right, but a relatively close fight until that beautiful Scottish twister towards the end of it. The bantamweight division around the world is one of the best divisions, and for the PFL to have a bantamweight division, it's very important, isn't it, Mike? Do you think, you spoke about Lewis McGrill and Evans, Kane and Cochran. This bantamweight division is good this year, but it's only going to get better and better, really, isn't it?
You hit the nail on the head, Sean. Jake Hadley's the favorite, right? I think that is the worst kept secret in this year's tournament. But overseas, you got Lewis McGrill. You've got Kalen Loughran, right? You've got those guys waiting in the wings. And again, this is all about the buildup that we talked about. Just because you win the tournament in 2025 doesn't mean you are going to John Jones a division in the PFL. You're not holding anything hostage. You're going to have fighters from all around the world chomping at the bit to make the world tournament. And for the PFL, this is exactly what you wanted. You wanted to say, this is who's good right now on our world tournament. We've got even more talent across the world. And now I think next year we'll see Lewis McGrillen. Listen, it could be this year. We could see those names pop up this year if there's injuries, any type of issue. These guys. So it was super important for the PFL not only to introduce the bantamweights, but we talked about it earlier. If you didn't feel there was a financial future with Patchy Mix and you wanted to do right by him, let him go find your own new star. And I think that's what they're doing. And I think the way they did it, instead of just letting Patchy, I'll say it, mow through the competition, which I think a lot of people would have expected him to do, now you have a pool full of everybody that no one knows what could happen. And I think it's great for business.
The women's flyweights then as well, obviously the one division they're going with this year. I think, look, it's been a really bad maybe 18 months for women's MMA. But the funny thing is, like, the shining light probably of that has been Dakota Dacheva for the PFL. And look, what you said there about Patchy Mix maybe mowing through everyone, I actually think they should have just done that with Dakota again. Just let her mow through everyone for another year. And then next year maybe do what they're doing this year. But look, she has a fight coming up and she'll probably fight the winner of this. What I would say about this is, right, so the four people that have qualified, obviously, Liz Carmouche, Shaklova, Bishop, and Elora Dana. You have Liz Carmouche there, obviously, who was I think she's still the Bellator flyweight champion, if I'm not mistaken. But you have three relatively new names along with her. You know, Kanamanatabe was beaten by Bishop, Velasquez was beaten by Shaklova. And if one of those goes on to win this tournament and beat Liz Carmouche, well, you immediately have someone that's, interesting's maybe tough because Dacheva's, you talked about John Jones people. That's what Dacheva is going to do to most people in this division. But at least you have someone that maybe has a bit of interest. If Liz goes on another good win streak, maybe there's a bit of interest as well in that. Like this time last year, I think the division they put together was really, really good. And like the one thing about Liz as well, she hasn't fought Dakota, which is a massive advantage as well. So just on that tournament, I think it's really, really good. And we're going to be talking a lot about that in the future. The lightweights, Mike. Again, always tough to decide who's going to win a lot of these lightweight fights. We spoke earlier on about Kevin Lee obviously coming in after Gadzi, JJ Wilson, who's obviously out now, Alfie Davis and Bryn Primus won their first round fights. the level of talent there is really good, isn't it? Like, who? I maybe not asking you for your pick, but how do you see that one maybe flowing out over the next while? And Kevin Lee, the introduction of Kevin Lee, it's going to be tough for him to win a fight, but Kevin Lee has always something to say, and he'd bring a bit of excitement, Mike.
Yeah, I think for as excited as we are about the international talent that the PFL has in bantamweight, I think we look at the world roster that they have at lightweight, and it's very, very good. Those are guys, unlike the division you just talked about in the women's flyweight, where we're like, is there a surprise here that can happen in the women's 125-pound division? I think when we look at the PFL lightweight division, they're all proven. They're all names. They all have credible resumes and value to this promotion. I mean, Brett Primus, don't tell him he just turned 40 years old. So, I mean, and Kevin Lee, right? This is a guy, Sean, the scariest fighters in the world are the ones who literally have their backs against their wall, not just for a single fight, but for over the course of the last few years. And respectfully, as one of the biggest Kevin Lee fans there is, that has been Kevin Lee. Throughout injuries, throughout changing of promotions, going other places, Kevin Lee has not found his home yet, and he's still relatively young. So as good as Godsey is, a hungry lion is a hungry lion, right? So there's so much intrigue, but there's so many proven names in this division that you can, but you really can't on paper have a bad fight in this tournament. So the lightweights, probably for my money, are the most exciting to watch because we know what these guys are capable of.
I'm a big fan of Alfie Davis as well, just on the lightweights as well. Like, I've been watching this guy since his early days, and he's not a lad that sets the world alight. Although if you look here on Sherdog, TKO spinning back elbow and punches, that would suggest otherwise. But yeah, I love that tournament. Then we have the middleweights, who fought on the same night and really put on a show here. Like, I'm a big fan of Dalton Rasta. He's winning against Adabusi with that Bravo jog. Fabian Edwards with just a great performance, great finish. This is what everyone has wanted to see from Fabian Edwards for so long. He's going to be fighting Joshua Silveira, and obviously Aaron Jeffrey came through as well, beating Murad Ramazanov. The middle, I think you know a lot of people listen to this show. I like to dunk on the middleweights a little bit, not just in the PFL, the UFC, everywhere. I actually think it's been a good year for the middleweights in the UFC. Obviously, the new division as well. We have Johnny Eblen out there who's going to be fighting in a couple of weeks. The winner of this is likely going to fight him. Fabian Edwards would be, he'd do everything he can, obviously, to get that fight again. But I would suggest, Mike, to you that if we did this sort of tournament with the top 5 of the UFC middleweights taken away, that we wouldn't get something maybe as good as this. I actually think this is a real good middleweight tournament, and the final 4 that we have here especially is pretty good. Are you excited for the middleweights?
As much as I just praised lightweights, I would say the middleweight division, and I'm probably going to catch heat for this, the PFL's middleweight division may be better than the PFL's, than the UFC's middleweight division. And I know that's a big
tough one
kind of comment to put out there, right? But you mentioned the final 4: Aaron Jeffrey, Dalton Rasta, Fabian Edwards, and Josh Silveira. Johnny Eblen's the champ. Let's not forget Impa Kasunganai, right? He could throw his name. If you give me the top 6, 7, 8 guys in the PFL's 185-pound division, because the other part of it is we were seeing these guys fight out of their division. We were seeing them fight at 170 or at 205. I mean, 185 was a move that had to happen, similar to bantamweight, because we were going to see some of the top talents. I guarantee you, if they were on the free agent market, the UFC would be calling for all 6 of those names that I just mentioned, right? Impa Kasunganai has been a part of the UFC, right? He's elevated his game. Johnny Eblen. I mean, the UFC, I'm surprised they haven't tried to back up the Brinks truck in front of his house for a talent of his nature, right? Dalton Rasta. Listen, Dalton Rasta is just a guy. I'm only saying this because he did the Stone Cold celebration, but he is literally like the PFL's Stone Cold Steve Austin. He's intense. He doesn't care about anything except beating people up and walking out. That's all he cares about. So I think there's a high level of talent in the PFL's middleweight division, and I think it's exemplified this year because they're all fighting where they should be.
the big boys then closed out our events so far with the light heavyweights and the heavyweights. And do you know what? The heavyweight division, I'll be honest, I'm seeing Moldavsky there. I'm seeing Romanov there. I'm seeing Popov there, and I'm seeing Nascimento there. And I'm thinking, God, it's missing, you know, the excitement that Capoloza brought a couple of years ago, or, you know, I actually really liked Billestini. He was kind of unfortunately lost that fight. That was a great fight with Moldavsky, but, you know, obviously Francis Ngannou or something was there. But the light heavyweights on paper, maybe you could have said the same thing about it, but that performance from Phil Davis, I don't think we've ever seen a performance like that before. Antonio Carlos Jr. and Carl Moore, you know, obviously my countryman, he could have won that fight. We all know the low blow and everything like that. It was very, very close, but Simeon Powell looked so good in that fight, and in Sullivan Cauley as well. I'm a big fan of him. I think the light heavyweight division is looking better than the heavyweight division at the moment. Would you agree, or are you a heavyweight guy?
No, easily 1,000% would agree with you, because you mentioned that name, right? There is only Francis Ngannou who can really right now save PFL's heavyweight division. It's no disrespect to the World Tournament, no disrespect to Denis Goltsov or anything. There's just not an aura around these heavyweights. I think because Francis Ngannou is still a part of the PFL company, people assume he's still a part of the roster. We don't know his fighting future, but we know he's a part of the company. So people will only sit back and go, well, eventually it's got to be Francis, because no heavyweight has captivated the attention of the company or the fan base at heavyweight besides Francis. So for heavyweight, it's Francis or bust right now. For light heavyweight, I mean, are you talking about Phil Davis? Yeah. 40 years old? No. Like you said, we haven't seen that performance. And there's a theme here, right? It goes all the way back to what we talked about to start this show. There are a lot of young, talented fighters coming for veterans who chose to stick around. That elevates. I talked about being the hungry lion and Kevin Lee. When everyone in your pool is hungry, that makes you want to fight for your food a little bit more. I think light heavyweight is even more intriguing because you have Simeon Powell, because you have Sullivan Cauley, and then you have Phil Davis and Antonio Carlos Jr., former champions, looking at these young guys going, oh, they want to take what we've been working for our whole careers. And it makes this so much fun to watch. Honestly, the light heavyweight tournament is so much more intriguing. I think it makes heavyweight an afterthought.
I agree. I would agree. Some of the other fights that are going to be coming up, and obviously there'll be breakdowns of all of these events, but Adam Barrows, Jeremy Kennedy, great fight. Acela Juge is fighting Eve Landu. I actually didn't even know about that till today. Spoke to Peter Queally there a couple of years ago, and he told me Acela Juge is the next guy coming through. So that's a big step up for him. I'm looking forward to seeing that. And, you know, we have other fights then, like Hamidov versus Magomedov. That's going to be really, really interesting. Mateus Matas against Lazar Darian. That Darian is a guy a lot of people have spoken about as well. And then we have, obviously, the Stotts and Pettis fight, which has been talked about for a long time. They're ex-teammates, aren't they, and everything? So, like, that's a very, very interesting one as well. So we'll have a lot of good stuff. Jordan Newman is also on the third card of this year. So some great stuff coming up with PFL, and I'm looking forward to covering every single bit of it. Mike, thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. Catch Mike's at work over Sherdog. Catch him on X. Catch all the good stuff on Sherdog.com. Until next time, my name is Sean Sheehan for Sherdog.com, and we'll see you all next time.